Another edition of the FutureSox RoundUp. It's been a little while. Our schedule's been a little all over the place. Both Jeff and I have been traveling, and I'm getting back in school now and dealing with stuff. So today I'm bringing on my guy Dylan. Dylan's been on before. Everybody knows Dylan. He's been our frequent guest on the RoundUp here. But we're gonna do a little bit of a different episode. We did our kind of our recaps of the two playoff runs with Kannapolis and then with Birmingham, right, which was really exciting and fun to do. We had Kurt Bloom on to talk about Birmingham, and now we're kind of going to take a look back at the season and then look forward a little bit. We're going to talk about breakouts today. So our episode today is going to be focused on, who broke out this past season. We're not talking guys that improved, right? We're talking guys that went from one kind of viewpoint of how they are viewed as a prospect to an entirely different level of a viewpoint, right? So guys that were, back of the top 30 or not even top 30 guys, right? That took a huge step forwards this year. Obviously, there's a few guys that first come to mind. We've got a handful of these guys we're going to go through. Definitely more pitchers than hitters on this side of the list, as we kind of know with this farm system. And then we're going to talk a little bit about 2025 breakouts. So guys that we see, we watch play this year, and there's some things we like, and there's a lot to be excited about, and we think they can be on this list come next year, right? So we're going to do a little bit of the breakouts from 24, and then look into 2025. We're also going to start by checking in with the Arizona Fall League, which we're a week in now, a little under a week into the Arizona Fall League. Super exciting time for prospects, for White Sox prospects. The White Sox have one of the best groups of prospects there. There's a lot of top prospects, including Colson Montgomery, Grant Taylor, some other guys we're going to hit on that are at the Arizona Fall League right now. So we've got a lot to talk about. We're going to try and speed through it here, and me and Dylan are just going to get you caught up a little bit. But first of all, Dylan, welcome back on, man. How you doing?
I'm doing good. I always love to come on here and talk White Sox prospects with you, so it's going to be fun.
Yeah, we have a good time for sure. It's
Yeah.
always a blast. We'll start in the Arizona Fall League. The White Sox this year, Glendale Desert Dogs, for those that follow, check out the FutureSox X page. Ian Eskridge is doing an excellent job updating on the Fall League. That's something that not many people cover, right? Like the Arizona Fall League is not like minor league baseball even. It's definitely not a lot of coverage, but there's StatCast information for it. There's top prospects from every single organization playing at this league. The Desert Dogs have a ridiculously talented roster between White Sox prospects, some of the top Reds guys on that team. There's some really good Dodgers prospects there. I mean, there is just talent up and down that roster. So it's really fun. I'm excited to kind of tune into some of those streams. I haven't got to yet, really. But we'll start with some of the headliners from the White Sox organization. 2 games in, Colson Montgomery looks pretty good, Dylan. He looks pretty solid.
Yeah.
He's played 2 games, 5 at bats. He's 2 for 5 plus a walk, so he's gotten on base at a over a 500 clip. Actually, he got on base in one other at bat as well. Has had one big double, hit some balls really hard. Looks like his approach is solid. He's going to play a lot. He's going to play some third base too, which is interesting because, we've seen him now get tested at third there. There's a lot of shortstops. Of course, a lot of top prospects are going to be coming from that middle infield rank, right? So Montgomery's going to get a look at both shortstop and third base during the Fall League. And so far his at-bats have looked pretty good to me.
Yeah, and that double that you mentioned, it was an opposite field double that he just took it, went with the pitch, roped it into the left center field gap, and that is, I think, what he needs to start doing more, and he'll start like going the opposite way more, like he did in 2023, where it looked like he was trending to be the White Sox shortstop in 2024. Obviously, things didn't go as planned for him this year, but if he can start using all fields and not just being a dead pull hitter and using his power to the left side, I think that is going to be when we really start to see everything click for him again. Because the back control is great, we know it, but there was just a little bit of something was off in his swing. His mechanics are looking a lot more fluid than they were. I think that the back injury that he had last year was also kind of nagging him. I think that it caused him to maybe tweak something in his swing, but it looks a lot better now in the fall.
Yep. 100%. And I think what I really like from the White Sox in the perspective here is that they pivoted, right? He wasn't on the initial roster for the Arizona Fall League, and they saw him hitting well in September in Charlotte. And even though he played a majority of a season in Charlotte, pretty much the whole season, right? They were able to say, hey, let's let this keep going because he's finding some things. He's looking better in the last few weeks of the season. Let's give him 10 games of live at bats in the Fall League, right? He's not going to play every day. Like nobody in the Fall League plays every day. That's how this works. There's a bunch of prospects. Everybody's got to get their reps in. Like he's going to be one of the primary players there, but he's going to get, 15 games in at most probably, right? But at the same time, that's a great way to keep building on what he was figuring out at the end of the season in Charlotte and set him up to go into spring training looking like, he's going to push for a roster spot sooner than later, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's against some very good competition in the Fall League. There's some good arms out there.
100%. Yeah, 100%. Tim Elko is another guy in the fall league who is also going to be, pushing for a roster spot, right? I think there's a real world if the White Sox move on with one of, if or both of Gavin Sheets and Andrew Vaughn this offseason, right? Which I expect at least one to be gone. I frankly
Yeah.
would not be surprised if both are gone.
Yep.
Tim Elko is going to have a shot to play first base for the White Sox in the pretty near future and could honestly break camp. It really wouldn't shock me depending on how free agency and the offseason goes. Elko had a home run because of course he did, right? He's 2 for 8 so far, 2 big hits, both well hit, and a walk as well. 1 walk, 2 strikeouts in his 2 games played. Like, that's good. We like that. Elko, what it comes down to is the discipline has to continue to get better, and he's got to find ways to minimize the amount he's whiffing and the amount he's swinging at pitches he doesn't need to be swinging at. When he hits the ball, it goes hard and far, and I'm excited to see some blast in Arizona, that's for sure. But I really want to see how he can handle himself in terms of his approach to the plate against some really high-level pitching prospects.
Yeah, we saw him walk a little bit more than we were used to in that Charlotte stint, and I think you saw how well he was hitting in Charlotte, and sending him to the fall league was a great idea because, like the same thing with Colson Montgomery, was hitting well at the end of the year and has a chance to break camp with the team next spring. I think that getting him looks against better competition and just under a more scrutinized plan, like, hey, here's what you need to do to make the team next year. Then
100%.
we want you to be on the team, which, I mean, he, like you said, hits the ball crazy hard. So
yeah. On the pitching side of things in Arizona, we will have more excitement to talk about there in the future. The first game for the Desert Dogs was basically just a White Sox prospects day. I think they threw 7 of the 9 innings were White Sox prospects, which is pretty hilarious because there is some really good arms here. Grant Taylor, it was a rough first start for him. I think this is a guy who's expected to be one of the better pitching prospects in Arizona in the fall league. At the same time, right, he hasn't thrown live in 4 months, basically, at this point. I think he tweeted it was basically exactly 4 months since his last start in Canny, right? And it's like, the stuff is exciting, right? We got to see him throwing 98 on Savant, right? Like, it's awesome to get pitch tracking data. His stuff is ridiculous. He couldn't quite command it in this first game. I'm not worried about it. Are you? I mean, I think it's a matter of let's see his stuff develop. We'll get him. He's going to get 4 or 5 starts, hopefully, which is awesome for him and really good for him going into next year. Not worried at all about a first game being rough for him. And I'm very excited to keep seeing some of the numbers pop up for him in his next start.
Yeah, the baseball savant data was ridiculous. I was just sitting here watching the live feed come through, and he was popping 97s, 98s every pitch, and then he drops off the banger curveball and slider that he has. It was really fun to watch, and I will say that he's throwing a changeup now. I don't know if it's a kick change, but he's a supinator, so he would be a candidate for it. The one pitch that he threw it was unfortunately a homer. He left it up in the zone to Colt Emerson, and he did what Colt Emerson does and hit it about 420 feet. But it's a solid pitch. So
yeah, 100%. No, it's cool to see what he's able to do, and I'm excited to watch him, and I'm not worried at all about that first game. Colt Emerson's also on a ridiculous tear to start the fall league, so not worried about that factor. The other guys, one of the guys I want to mention for sure is Eric Adler. Adler looked great in his first appearance in the fall league. He pitched an inning and 2/3, didn't give up a single hit. He looked good. Eric Adler is a guy that I've been a big proponent of for a long time. I've watched him all season. I've been saying, he's kind of in that next wave of these relievers, and with that, that starting crew that's going to come up, right? Like, he's going to be on the White Sox sometime in 2025. I'm curious to see how quick it'll be because, frankly, if he pitches really well throughout the whole fall, I'm not sure that he's in the minors for long next year. I don't think he breaks camp, but I think he could be a pretty early call up considering what he did last year, especially towards the end of the year in Birmingham. And relievers that are that good necessarily, you don't really need much time in Charlotte, I don't think.
No, especially with the Charlotte bullpen was already very good this year. I know that there was a period where they I think they threw a bullpen game no hitter, it was something ridiculous like that. But I think that Adler should probably, I don't want to say make the team out of spring training, but he should be one of the first arms that's called upon when we need one, because the 100%. The bullpen we saw this year wasn't good at all. And I think that it depends on who they sign and who stays with the team and whatnot. But I do really like Adler and his chances in 2025 and beyond.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. A bunch of other bullpen guys that we're going to get better results from in the future. It was that first game was kind of a slugfest towards the end. Paulette
Yeah.
had a few nice strikeouts, but did give up a run there. Hoopy gave up a few runs there, as did Dahlquist. All those guys I think we're expecting to see more from. DJ Gladney's only played in one game offensively, but we'll see some more from him. So we'll have more fall league updates throughout the next month or two. I'm hoping there's a chance I'm going to get out to Arizona. I might try and sneak out there for a weekend if I can to go watch some of these guys live and talk to them, but a little bit tight on the scheduling for me. But either way, the fall league is going to be fun to follow. It's a great time for these guys to develop. And I think there's, 4 or 5 of these guys that we just talked about that are going to be with the White Sox in 2025. So this is a great little way to get a taste for them to get some more at bats in before they head into their offseason. So let's get into our breakouts, though. This is our main topic for today. And we want to talk we've been talking about prospects all year. Both of us are following everybody throughout the season, but we want to look back at this year and look at some guys that just stand out as like, this guy just broke out. They found something, they adjusted, they took their game to another level. There is nobody we can start with on this list other than Brooks Baldwin, right? Like we can't start anywhere else, because I think when you think about a breakout, like that is Brooks Baldwin. He entered the year as a fringe top 30, maybe. I think he was on our honorable mention for FutureSox, but he wasn't even a top 30 guy. I liked him. I always thought he looked good last year in 2023, but this year was ridiculous. The numbers he put up were just absolutely silly. It was numbers that you don't see from like anyone, nonetheless, like not a high level prospect necessarily, right? He forces his way all the way to Chicago in his second full professional season. Just ridiculous stuff from Baldwin all year. Just give me your take on just like what you saw from Baldwin in the first few months and what you think maybe we can kind of see from him going forward too.
I think that I saw elite bat control. That's his calling card. He's going to get on base. He's going to make a ton of contact. He's not going to hit for a ton of pop. He has maybe 10 homer potential in his bat, but he's not going to hit for a lot of power like a Tim Elko will. But in his season this year, 324, 391, 460 slash line for a 150 WRC plus across double and triple A, which is just unheard of, especially in the Southern League where it's a very pitcher dominant league. To only strike out 16.4% of the time against some of the best pitching prospects in all of minor league baseball is just unreal. I think that he should probably be the second baseman on opening day, just because he's got the experience. I mean, he was up in, I believe it was July or August, whenever, but got hurt. Unfortunately, didn't finish the season healthy. But it wasn't a major injury. It was something, I think it was his hand, I believe.
Yeah,
pretty sure. But anyways. Yeah, he should be healthy, and I think that we should start to see him go back to maybe not the 330 hitter that he was in Double-A, but I think that he can be a solid contact and speed type of player with fantastic defense. I think he led the White Sox in outs above average and played like 30 games. So
nice.
Yeah,
no, I think Brooks is, what we saw from him this season was he just embraced who he was as a hitter. He really, when he was in Birmingham, just tapped into that. He's just going to make contact all the time. He's going to put the ball in play. He's going to run hard. He's going to steal bags, right? He's going to hit stuff in the gap, and he's just going to make things happen and get on base all the time. I mean, it's not flashy. I don't think there's upside of like an all-star necessarily, right? Like this is probably, a solid second baseman and or utility piece in the future, right? Like that is his profile most likely, but at the same time, like you can't deny what he did this season. In Birmingham, you hit on it, right? It's a pitcher-friendly league, and he was the best hitter in that lineup, the way the Birmingham Barons were. I mean, that was a lineup loaded with talent. They were winning games all the time. They had this amazing pitching staff, but it was Brooks Baldwin getting it started almost every game. He at the top of the lineup. He was just getting on base constantly. Hitting 322 in the Southern League does not happen. That's really just not something that happens. And he just crushed it. And he got to Charlotte, and then he had a week in Charlotte where he just continued to do even better. And then it was like, okay, here, go to Chicago, right? And I think a lot of people jumped off the wagon from 33 games in Chicago. And it's like, I'm just not going to put that much stock into that this season. In my opinion, really, none of these rookies' numbers in Chicago this year really mean much to me, to be honest. It was the worst team of all time. It was a horrible situation to enter. It was pressure to break these losing streaks every other month. There was a terrible losing streak that we're trying to break every day. And it's just like, I just don't put much into it. He only had 114 at bats, man. I'm not going to act like 114 at bats make him not as good as he looked in the minor leagues. Yeah, he's not going to hit 320 in the big leagues. Can he be a 290 hitter with, a handful of steals, a bunch of doubles, and play a good second base with the ability to back up someone at shortstop? Like, I can see that for sure. Switch hitter, right? Like
100%.
there's a lot of value in Brooks Baldwin. So he is the definition of a breakout this year, and someone I'm excited to see moving forward. On the pitching side of things, I think the guy that stands, there's a few guys that really stand out to me here, but I think the first one's Mason Adams. Mason, I think he popped onto our radar and that of a handful of people at FutureSox and some White Sox people in that world last year, a little bit in 2023, when he was piggybacking Noah Schultz, and then he started starting games at the end of the year, and his numbers were great. But I don't think he broke out all the way. I think it was more of like, let's keep an eye on this guy. And then this year it was like, all right, this is a big league pitcher. Watch out.
Yeah.
This year was just unbelievable for Adams. He got up to Charlotte at the end of the year, dealt with an injury, didn't have the best, hand. I think he only had a couple starts there, right? But he is someone who I think, in Birmingham this year was through, 18 games in Birmingham, 17 starts. He had one of those piggyback games, a 2.44 ERA across over 100 innings, only 90 hits allowed, 19 walks to 101 strikeouts in Birmingham. That's ridiculous. That's not normal, right? I mean, we talk about this with Adams, like his calling card is command, like Baldwin's is, contact skills. Neither of these guys are necessarily like star upside players, but they both broke out and prove that they're big league pieces moving forward. Adams, the combination of command, his ability to maneuver multiple pitches all over the different parts of the zone. He loves riding high parts of the zone. He's got the breaking ball that's really effective. He went from being, a back end top 30 guy. I think he was on my top 30, but he definitely wasn't high on it, to being, a top 10 system in the prospect, or top 10 prospect in the system.
Yeah, I mean, you sort of hit the nail on the head there. It's elite command. I think he only had let me look, a 5.7% walk rate across both levels. Like that's command that you don't see every day. And maybe it won't be as sharp in the big leagues. Better hitters they're gonna be able to lay off some of the pitches that minor leaguers would chase. But I mean, a 5.7 walk rate from anybody isn't going to balloon to like a 20, 25, 30, where it's like detrimental to them. But it's a big breaking ball. He like hides his fastball very well. It's like a short armory delivery. It's like low 3/4. He gets a lot of sink on the ball, gets a lot of ground balls, doesn't sort of contact managing like 3-4 starter. I think that's you need those guys in your rotation, especially with just the amount of young arms that are coming up. Having a guy in Adams who's already throwing 120, 130 innings, he's got the experience. He can handle a full season's workload right away.
Yep, completely agree. It's going to be huge. I mean, we saw Jonathan Cannon wasn't amazing, but he was probably the second most valuable pitcher on the White Sox this year behind Garrett Crochet, right? So it's like you've got guys like that. You need guys that can pound the zone, that can make things happen. And I think Adams actually has a little bit more swing and miss and a little bit more upside in terms of getting guys to chase than Cannon does probably sometimes. So I think it's a really exciting arm, and he's going to be someone we're gonna look at him as he'll be up next year, right? And pretty soon next year potentially, right? The injury in Charlotte obviously he only pitched 5 games in Charlotte and definitely struggled there a little bit. But he was hurt too during part of that. He missed a few weeks with a back injury, came back, made a few starts, not putting much stock in it. It's also just pitchers in Charlotte too. Numbers are never going to look great there. And then, I don't think he breaks camp, because I do think there's a lot of other arms that are going to have opportunities to start. But I do think, come June, I think he's probably one of the earlier starters that comes up to fill an injury spot or fill somebody's spot that gets replaced, right? So I'm excited to see Adams at the big league level. I think he's someone that, even him breaking out, I still don't think his name is that known comparatively to a lot of these other prospects in the White Sox system, right? So I think he's going to come up, and I think there's going to be some people that are like, who is this guy and why is he really fun to watch? Because he is really fun to watch. So I'm excited to see him. The next guy is a little bit more of a re-breakout. That's what I'm going to call it, because I wouldn't say he's quite a breakout, because he was at one time, a top 5 to 7 prospect in the system, fell off lists entirely in the past year or two due to injuries, and then came up and was, of everybody that got called up this season, I think the most impressive starting pitcher among all the starters that got called up, rookie starters, some point this season. Sean Burke looked exceptional. He started to find some things in, this season in the minors, and then came up to Chicago and was on a roll in Charlotte his last few starts, and then really, really found it. So it's just like, I think he is someone that is going to get a rotation spot out of camp, in my opinion, and I don't really see why he shouldn't. I mean, his last few starts of the season were exceptionally good.
Yeah, I think he earned it. Down the stretch, he threw 19 innings in the big leagues, a 1.42 ERA. That's going to earn you a spot. I don't care how old you are. I mean, he's young. Like he's not like some 27-year-old that is like a journeyman minor leaguer. No, he's an actual prospect. I think that a lot of people, myself included, were starting to hop off the bandwagon after his
Yeah, same. I mean, it's hard. Yeah,
2023. Yeah, got hurt, didn't look good, but he's proved me wrong, and I think that if he can be like another middle of the rotation starter to pair behind Hagen Smith, Noah Schultz,
yeah,
where they have top of the rotation upside, Sean Burke is he's a perfect candidate for that role, and I think
yeah.
that he's gonna thrive. And if somehow starting doesn't work out for him, I think that he's got a very good like middle inning relief profile. I think that the fastball breaking ball is very good. I think that
100%.
if he just ends up being a two pitch guy out of the bullpen, that's fine by me too.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was on with him earlier in the season, but I have a hard time. Now I'm like, I see it, right? I see it as a starter. I've
Mhm.
seen it work as a starter, and now I have a hard time even wanting to go back to that in my head because of how successful he looked as a starter. And I think there's no guarantee, right? Come next season, right? Things can change, of course. And I think you're right. He has a fallback as a very high upside reliever. But I think he can start, man. I mean, his last,
Mhm.
like when I talk about a re-breakout, right? His last 5 starts in Charlotte were all 2 or less earned runs and all 5+ strikeouts, with 3 of them being 8+ strikeouts, right? Comes up to Chicago, makes a relief appearance and is lights out, and then makes 3 starts going at least 5 innings in all of them with 5+ strikeouts in all of them. Like, he looks good. He looks like he's mixing and matching. He's turned his slider into almost like a strike pitch, which is really fascinating to me because when I was looking through some of his advanced data, he has a higher strike percentage on his slider than his fastball
Hmm.
in Charlotte this year, which is a really interesting thing for a guy like that with his profile, right? His downer curveball is the flashy breaking ball, right?
Yeah.
That's the breaking ball you look at and you're like, oh, that's gross looking, right? And it is really, really good. His slider has become that sharp slider that he's able to pinpoint in the lower half of the zone. So with him, it's like if he can make that slider almost kind of a strike pitch in a same less more than a out pitch, right? And then he has that curveball to play off. And if he really, for him, like when he's working the changeup too, it's over. Like that's the guy where
Yeah.
if he has all 4 pitches working, and it's hard for him to get all 4 working on the same day, but when he does, he's as good as almost any of these young pitchers we talk about.
Definitely. And like you were saying, the slider, it's not even like, I wouldn't even call it a gyro ball where it
Right.
just goes up and it doesn't follow, or it moves just like how a ball with no gravity would.
Yeah.
Yeah, gyro
Gross.
sliders, it just follows the path of the
Yeah.
ball. If there was no spin, it just goes straight down. But anyways, it's more of like a sweep version of that. I don't want to say it's definitely not a sweeper. It's more of like a sweepy cutter, but the curveball
Right.
is gross. It gets more than 15 inches of horizontal or vertical break straight down. It's
Yeah.
a
It's gross.
fantastic pitch. So
100%. The next guy I want to talk about is someone that, for me, I'm not sure I'd call him a breakout because I have been on him since last year. But Aldrin Batista, man, took another step this year and became someone that I think is now widely considered to be a really high end prospect for the White Sox, and someone that among the lower level guys is probably one of the better options in the system right now. You look at a guy that had came over to the White Sox in a trade last season, right? Made 5 starts in Kannapolis, looked good, looked really good, but 5 starts, right? This year he comes into Canny. He makes 17 starts in Canny, and then he finishes the season with 5 more starts in Winston. The total cumulative, the numbers got way better in Winston, first of all, right? But the total numbers on the season: a 2.93 ERA across 22 starts. Only 89 hits allowed in 111 innings, to go with 116 strikeouts, 39 walks. It's just funky and it's cool and it's a really weird release point, but everything moves. He doesn't throw anything straight. It's all moving, and it moves well. His two seam sinker kind of is really gross for a fastball, and it's his primary fastball that he uses, and paired with a slider that can be really good at times. And he's had trouble leaving it up occasionally, but generally speaking, Aldrin Batista is a guy that broke out in a huge way, and now looks like he could be sooner than later in Birmingham with all those other top pitching prospects.
yeah, I think that he's a guy that we sort of like we're kind of in on to start the year, but we didn't. I don't think I expected it to be this good and over this amount of innings. I don't think I was expecting him to throw 110 innings this year, especially coming off of. I mean, he wasn't coming off of an injury or anything, but he's a younger guy, and to throw 110 innings in your age 21 season, like that's pretty impressive. So I think that he ends up being probably one of the 5 guys in that Birmingham rotation to start the year. if by some reason he's in Winston, I think that he'll work his way up there in no time. I think that he's probably one of the higher upside arms that is in the lower levels. I'm not even in the lower levels anymore because he's started his climb. So I
Yeah.
think that Batista is a guy that we both like. I know that you are like the All Dream Batista man in FutureSox and just on Twitter in general. But I love him too. I think that he's gonna be fun to watch next year for sure.
Yeah, 100%. I want to pivot to someone else who's, this is an interesting one because I wouldn't say his numbers jump off the page. I don't think he's someone who necessarily looks like a top end prospect, but given the circumstances of how he was acquired, brought over in the Aaron Bummer trade as kind of the throw in prospect piece, right? The White Sox basically took on 4 40-man guys that the Braves just needed to get rid of. And then they got one project prospect from Illinois, and essentially, right, it was like one of those, let's see what he's got in the tank. Riley Gowans in his first professional season after being traded to the White Sox, right, like he showed some really good flashes last year in the Braves organization. He only pitched in 5 games after being drafted, and then comes over to the White Sox organization and looked really good. He started his season in Winston and was solid in Winston, got to Birmingham and was even better, right? The stuff is really impressive. With Gowans, it comes down to if he can command a little more consistently and if he can limit the long ball, right? He gave up 13 home runs. He does get burned sometimes. That's one thing with him where he can leave stuff over and get burned, but 122 innings with 145 strikeouts, didn't allow a ton of hits, only 97 hits across those 122 innings, right? Like the stuff is really good. 46 walks, a little high, but it's not terrible, honestly. And this is a guy who can be really, really overpowering at times. Like he had a few starts where it was like 10 Ks, 11 Ks, 1 run, 11 Ks across 6 innings, scoreless, right? Like he had some crazy good starts, also some rough starts, right? And then he had some really good playoff starts too for the Barons. So really cool to see kind of what Gowans was able to do this year in his first, full season. And I'm hoping I'm going to have him on the pod in a week or two here, talk a little bit about the Birmingham run with him. Cause I talked to him at the beginning of the season when he'd first come over in that trade, and he was just trying to learn and figure things out. And now we've got a guy who pitched well in Birmingham across the whole second half, and is someone who I think deserves to be looking at a potential big league opportunity come 2026 potentially, right?
Yeah, I think that like his climb was like sort of surprising. I don't think that anybody was expecting
Right.
the throw-in guy that in the Aaron Bummer deal to be anything, as most throw-in guys usually are. But I mean, those 2 starts that you were talking about in mid-May, back-to-back starts, 7 innings, 10 strikeouts, 7 innings, 11 strikeouts, and 1 hit and 3 hits in those 2 starts.
Yeah.
So I mean, he's got the stuff. It's going to come down to, like you were saying, the command. If he can just limit that and continue to just strike people out, I mean, it's a fun profile, and especially with the story that he had being an Illinois kid, I think that it's a fun profile, and I
Yeah.
would really like to see him throw more. I don't want to say more, but like because he did throw 120 innings this year,
Yeah.
but just continue to watch him rise. I think that, like you're saying, a 2026 ETA is not out of the question. Just because like there's so many other arms. I think that if we didn't have this type of depth, I think that he would be one of the guys that we're talking about maybe late in the season next year. But with just the amount of talent that is coming up on the pitching side, there's just it's going to be a fight for spots for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And he's someone that, he's gonna have to fight for a rotation spot, as crazy as that seems for a guy who's so good.
Yeah.
Like there's so many guys that need rotation spots in Birmingham and eventually Charlotte, right? So we'll see what happens with Gowans. And I think he's got a profile with the way he throws his fastball too, where he could also be a really good reliever if he transitions there. Either way, I think he put himself on the prospect radar, on the radar of like a potential big leaguer, as opposed to the beginning of the season where it was like, oh, here's a flyer, let's see what happens, right? So that in my mind is still a breakout there. Plenty of relievers we could do here. I picked one reliever in particular to focus on. There is a lot of other guys. I think at some point in this offseason, I'll do an episode where it's just like literally like here's the future bullpen options in Chicago, because I feel like we don't spend enough time on relievers, and it's hard to because there's a lot of guys obviously on each each level. There's a bunch of relievers. There's a lot of good ones, right? One guy I want to talk about in terms of breakout though, because he was a draft pick last year, because he kind of doesn't have a lot of pedigree, is Zach Franklin. Zach Franklin was a 10th rounder last year out of your current school. Shout out Mizzou. But he is a guy that was not really a lot of pedigree at all. Not much to think of there. He was kind of instantly going to be a reliever profile. He was never going to be tried as a starter. This year, he starts in Winston, ends up in Birmingham. he finished the year. First of all, he got a lot of high leverage. The stuff is really good. His fastball is one of the highest graded fastballs in all minor league baseball this year. I saw a Baseball America article like a month ago that was breaking down some like pitches and like top valued pitches. His fastball with the way it moves is one of the best pitches in minor league baseball. 50 and 2/3 total innings this year, 75 strikeouts, only 19 walks for Franklin out of the bullpen. Only 2 home runs allowed. Limits hard contact, a lot of strikeouts. He just is a really, really fun bullpen arm and someone that I don't think gets quite enough attention. So I wanted to bring him up here. Since he got to Birmingham, towards the second half of the season, or just the final like month of the season, 8 games in Birmingham with a .9 ERA across 10 innings, 4 hits allowed, 17 strikeouts in his brief stint in Birmingham to finish the year. He could open up as the potential closer or setup guy in Birmingham next year. And considering he's 25 years old and he was drafted at I think he was drafted already at 24, I think, or he was a senior signing, right?
Yeah, so a senior sign.
This is a guy who I think could be up next year, honestly, considering, he's 25. He was electric in Birmingham. I think he'll start in that Birmingham bullpen, and we'll see him in Charlotte pretty soon.
Yeah, I mean, for Franklin, it's sort of like what left is there to prove? Like he's right. Dominated the lower levels. He dominated in his limited time in Birmingham, but I mean, he's started his climb. I think that he should probably be that Birmingham closer. But you mentioned the fastball. Lance Brosdowski, a great follow on Twitter, great subscribe on YouTube. He just posted a video I believe it was yesterday. Zach Franklin had the highest swing and miss percentage on the fastball of any minor league player. It was a 44% whiff rate, which is 8% higher than any other fastball in the minor leagues. Like it's a true like unicorn fastball, just because it doesn't get a lot of extension. He sort of short arms the ball, but the induced vertical break that he has, it's so weird. Like it's a low slot, but it just explodes out of his hand. It just seems to like rise.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a really cool note there. Lance is a great follow for sure. But Franklin is someone who just was phenomenal and jumped out to me as one of the many relievers that took a step forward and looks like a big league reliever sooner than later. We'll wrap here with 2 hitters, and then we'll talk briefly on just a few guys we're just projecting excitement for in 2025. Rikui Nishida is one who we need to mention here because I don't think it's tricky to figure out what breakout means for him because I don't know if anything changed in terms of like what we view him as a player, right? Like as his profile. But Nishida, this is a guy who like he just defies all odds, and he did it again this year. He started in Kannapolis. He was really good. He lasted in Kannapolis probably longer than he needed to. He goes up to Winston. He was good again in Winston and pretty quickly gets the bump to Birmingham for their playoff push because they needed a little bit more oomph in their lineup, and he was a huge part of them winning that Southern League championship because he is such a unique player. He has an exceptional eye and just feel for the zone. Obviously a really small guy, which helps, the zone is smaller for him than it is for most players, but he has such an impressive feel for it. He knows how to control himself. He takes what he wants. He attacks when he needs to. The power is never going to be there, right? But the contact, the speed, and the approach is really, really good for a guy that also plays pretty good defense at second base and in the outfield.
Yeah, it's like you said, the power is never going to be there. He had 1 home run this year across nearly 600 plate appearances. It was I don't think we will ever see a Riku Nishida homer or multiple Riku Nishida homers in a single year. It might, but I don't think that we're going to see that. But he hit 304 across 3 levels this year. But the big thing with him is just creating chaos. Like he puts the ball in play, he forces the defense to make a play, and he just busts his butt down the line and gets on and steals every single base. He had 49 stolen bases, only got caught 12 times. And for a period of time, he was looking like he was tracking to break the White Sox minor league single season stolen base record. He didn't get there. He slowed down towards the end of the year. But I mean, he had like 30 plus in like early June or something crazy like that. But he's a guy where
it's nuts. And then on top of that, right? Like No, I mentioned the approach, right? And it's like it's 86 walks and 64 strikeouts, right? So the stolen bases become so much more valuable because he's getting on base all the time, right? If you have a guy like that who can get on base at the top of the lineup, he works counts like crazy too, which is something that was so clear in how it impacted his teams this year in Canny earlier in the year, and then especially in Birmingham's playoff run. When you're able to have a guy at the top of your lineup or even at the bottom of your lineup, or even if he's the 9 guy, right, that can work counts like that, it does wonders for the rest of your lineup when the pitcher just has to be like, oh my God, I just wasted 13 pitches getting Riku Machida to end up walking him, right? Or ends up,
Yeah.
he, even if he gets out, right, he grounds out to whatever. He just makes pitchers work. And that is something that's really valuable. And I think it's crazy to envision him as a major league player, but I'm not ruling it out, man. After
Yeah.
this season, the way he looked, I am not ruling it out.
Yeah, I think that he's a guy where, I mean, you don't like when he comes up to the plate, you're like, all right, it's not like a Tim Elko type where he's big guy, he's going to hit the ball 115
Right.
miles an hour, but it's just a guy that you have to deal with, and if you don't deal with him, he'll make you pay, because if he gets on, you're thinking about him stealing second, but then you're also trying to pitch to who's batting behind him in the Birmingham lineup towards the end of the year. Was it
Camilletti at the end.
yeah, Camilletti, yeah.
Yeah, it was
But
Camilletti. Yeah.
you gotta worry about Riku stealing second, but then you also have to deal with Camilletti, who's he can
Yeah.
smoke the ball. So
Yeah, 100%. The last guy we'll finish here is kind of our transitional guy from, breakouts of 2024 to breakouts of 2025, because he did look good this year, but I think both of us are pretty excited about what is next for him, because he wasn't bad this year, but I wouldn't call 2024 a full breakout for Rony Hernandez. Rony Hernandez was in Kannapolis all this season, 19-year-old from Venezuela, a guy that was really, really good last year in the Complex League, spends the entire season in Canny, developing as a catcher, developing as a hitter. He's someone who, as for a big dude that has a very powerful style of swing, we didn't see the power this year. But on the bright side, we saw 62 walks, only 59 strikeouts for a guy that swings with a powerful lefty type of swing, more walks than strikeouts, pretty good contact skills this year, hit 272, a 715 on base percentage or 715 OPS, but it was only one home run. And where is that next step? So Rony was good, but I think there's a whole nother level for him to reach when he starts to figure out some things with his swing that can allow him to launch a little bit more often.
yeah, I think that you hit the nail on the head again. I think that his defense improved a lot this year. I think that was one of the areas that he focused on in the offseason, and it showed on the field. He played in 96 games, was a catcher for most of them. They split duties towards the end of the year once the 2024 guys got there. But
Yeah.
he's a fantastic blocker. He moves well for a big guy. I mean, he's like 6'4".
He's getting there. Yeah, he's getting there for sure.
Yeah. But yeah, just developing that power and just getting back into the home run stroke. I think that we're going to start to see him skyrocket. I think I put him towards I might have put him 29 or 30 on my list, but he's definitely going to be a guy to watch next year. And if everything clicks for him, I think that we start calling him like top 20, top 15 if everything goes right,
Yeah.
because he's young. He was 19 this year and showed that he can put up a fight with some of the better pitchers in single A.
Yeah, 100%. I think he's going to be someone we're definitely going to have our eye on. The obvious breakout for 2025 is the guy we mentioned earlier, Grant Taylor. We don't have to dive too much into Grant Taylor. Like, the simple point about Grant Taylor is, like, when he's locating, he is one of the nastiest pitchers in all of minor league baseball. And my boss and buddy RM Layton has said this many times, but, like, he's a top 100 prospect if he gets innings under his belt and is fully healthy. Like, that's the type of talent we're talking about here with Grant Taylor. Like, his stuff is obviously Noah Schultz and Hagen Smith are the top 2 prospects in the system, for a reason, pitching wise, right? Taylor's clearly number 3 in my eyes once he's healthy, gets these innings, right? Like, his talent is up there with those guys. He's closer to those guys than I think he is to some guys below him, honestly. Yeah. He just has to get some innings. He has to build it up. But, like, if you told me Grant Taylor is going to put like a 2 ERA up in 2025, I would not be surprised at all.
Yeah, it just comes down to him staying on the field. We all know that he's gross. We have seen it firsthand in the, I think, 7 or 8 starts that he made this year before
5.
going down.
Yeah,
5. Yeah. Before going down with a lat injury, he was nuts. 2 walks to like 32 strikeouts. Something ridiculous.
The numbers were stupid. Yeah, they were stupid.
It's gross. Just staying on the field, he's just he's going to overpower anybody that steps into the box, especially in the lower levels. You're geared up for 98, 99, then he snaps off a slider at 83. You won't be able to touch it.
Yeah. The next guy, these are some young guys. A lot of these guys are other guys we kind of are looking at potential breakouts, right? Ryan Burrows is one of them for me. Burrows is a guy that I am just high on because I think his athleticism and I think his approach to the game, and I think as a fielder too, I think he's got a lot of things that we are excited about. He hasn't had the best numbers consistently, right? But I think there's more in the tank for him, and I think I don't know if it's I don't know if we're going to see him jump to like a high level prospect status, but I do think there is something for him to find out there. He made a lot of swing adjustments later in the season. He completely changed kind of the way he sets up his swing and his hands, particularly in the second half of the season this year in Kannapolis, right? It's not perfect. There's a lot of work to be done still for Burrows, right? 77 games in Kannapolis. He had a 538 OPS, 107 strikeouts, right? Like it wasn't great this year, right? Offensively, it was ugly for most of this year, but some huge playoff games are down the stretch for Canny. Plays a really, really good infield mostly. He's made some sloppy errors at times, but generally speaking, this is a guy that can play a very solid middle infield and has more in the tank in terms of power and impact at the plate, I think.
Definitely. I think that he's just got to cut down the strikeouts. You mentioned the swing change. It did look good. He looked more comfortable, and it looked like he was able to tap into more of his raw power, which for him, I think that it's a good thing. But I think that if he's able to cut down that strikeout rate to below 25, I think we're going to start to really see him skyrocket. You mentioned the defense. It's pretty. I think that he can probably start in Canny again, but then work his way up to Winston. But there's no telling where he's going to end up, because he's a guy that if everything starts to click, I think that he could start to be like top 20, top 15 on lists
100%.
Because he's got upside for sure.
Yeah. Joral Perez is the next one on this Breakout for 2025 list. And I think he, being the centerpiece or one of the bigger pieces of a major trade at the deadline, right? You're already kind of on the radar. I don't think he can break out. Like he already is an established prospect. He's top 15 in the White Sox system. He was, a big part of the trade deadline, right? 105 games in single A between the Dodgers and White Sox organization, stays at the level after the trade, 793 OPS, walked 62 times, 25 doubles, 12 home runs, right? Like small guy, but packs a punch, really good line drive swing, able to drive the ball all over the field. The strikeouts were high still, 110 strikeouts, right? Because he is someone who has a pretty powerful swing and needs to probably shorten it a little bit at times. But I do think there's a lot of impact there for Perez for a guy that his size and stature and play style, right? Like there's a lot more impact than you'd expect. And I think that he's someone who, we could see him hopefully take that jump in Winston-Salem, right? I think he should go straight to high A. I don't think he needs to be in single A next year. I think once he gets up to the next level and maybe even to Birmingham eventually, right, we can see him take that jump of like, oh, here's a young, really, really good prospect, 19 years old. He's about to turn 20 soon. So still really young. And here's a young guy that we can kind of have some hope for and some excitement for in terms of the hitting side.
Yeah, he was the only player to play out of that Eric Fetty deal or the two prospects that we got from the Dodgers. Right. Alexander Albertus didn't play because of a leg injury, and he's another guy where I could see him having a good 2025 and surprising people. But with Perez, you just got to cut down the strikeouts. It's a lot of power that you wouldn't expect from a smaller guy. I mean, he's 6 foot, so I mean, not too small, but when you compare him
he's 6 foot on his best days, I would say, from hanging out with him in person a little bit.
But he's not like a George Wolko type where you expect him to hit a ball 480 feet, but there's some sneaky pop in there.
Yeah, for sure. Another young guy that was a trade acquisition acquired last offseason, someone that I know you were really excited about, so I'll let you take the floor on this mostly. Samuel Zavala had a rough year, but also an interesting year, right? There's a lot of, intriguing kind of atmosphere, aspects with him, right? 83 walks, which is incredibly exciting, right? A 340 on base percentage, but only hit 187, right? So it's like the contact skills were not where you want to see them, but the approach is really good, and he does have some power to tap into, plays a good center field. Where are you at with Zavala heading into next year?
I just need to see some swing mechanics change. Like he's got that big leg kick. I think that if he shortens up, I think that he's going to be a guy where we start to see him tap into more of the using all fields. He pulled the ball a lot this year. It was a very dead pull approach, because when you're gearing up and you have to just snap your hands through, you're going to pull the ball a lot. There's a bit of a whiff issue, or not even a bit, a whiff issue at the top of the zone with him. He's very susceptible to high fastballs. But I think that if he does shorten up and can still maintain that same approach, I think that we're going to see him start to regain some of that status that was expected of him going into this year, at least by my standards.
Yeah.
I mean, he posted a 140 WRC plus in single A in 2023 as an 18-year-old. Like that, you don't lose that ability to hit just in a single year. I think that he was aggressively assigned to high A as a 19-year-old. That he's very young for the level. I think that he's probably still stays there next year, at least to start.
Yeah,
But
I
I
agree.
think that we could start to see him skyrocket in terms of what we think about him, because I know he dropped to, I believe it was around 20 on our list. But I mean, I think that he can absolutely regain that top 10 prospect status that he had when he came over.
Yeah, I would love to see it. I think it's just going to come down to the contact. I agree. The swing mechanics could use a little adjustment too. There's a lot of pitchers we could go to here. We're only going to do one here. There's plenty of other guys that we are excited to see, and we will talk more about kind of all different prospects throughout all the levels and everybody we're watching this offseason. We're going to do a ton of different types of episodes, but we'll wrap with Seth Keener. Seth Keener is someone who I really liked his profile coming out of the draft, and I think it was the organization chose to try and kind of mold him into a starter, right, which is never easy to do. Taking a guy that was a reliever primarily in college and trying to build that starter routine, make that work, right? Keener is someone who looked really good at times. Definitely had some inconsistencies, but I think a lot of that came with learning how to be a starting pitcher and learning how to go longer in games, right? In his 14 starts in Canny to start the year, a 3.36 ERA, 32 walks, 75 strikeouts. The stuff was good. The stuff is really good. The stuff is something that, you can tell from the way he pitched in college and at Wake Forest and when he was getting deployed in this like slider fastball reliever kind of style, right? He's got a really good slider fastball combo. He's got some other stuff he mixes in. I think for him, it's going to come down to the command, and it's going to come down to building out that repertoire a little bit more beyond the fastball slider, because he has a changeup, he has other stuff. I think he mixes in a fourth pitch too, I believe. But this is someone who is primarily a slider guy. Like his slider is his pitch, right?
Yeah,
So worst case scenario, you move him to the bullpen, and this slider could make him an elite reliever back in the bullpen role that he used to be in, right? But they want
right.
him to be a starter, and I think he showed enough to earn another season of starting and working through that. But you got to develop another pitch to be able to trust a little bit more, and the command has to come a little bit further along, and he has to do a little bit better of a job limiting pitch counts, right? Because there was some counts in this season where he would get really deep in counts, and he'd end up in a 8-9 pitch of bats over and over, and then he'd get pulled in the fourth inning, right? So got to get him a little bit more length, and got to figure out kind of what those next secondary pitches are going to be for him.
Yeah, and staying on the field too. I think that
Yeah.
he only threw one game or 2 games, sorry, in Winston after he got promoted.
Right, coming off the injury. Yeah.
Yeah. So if he can stay on the field and continue to, just like you said, develop as a starting pitcher, I think that we're going to see him
100%.
start to climb, because that high A rotation was pretty good towards the back half of the year with him,
Totally.
Batista, Gowans went up, but before those two. But I think
Yeah,
that
100%.
Keener is a guy where next year should be pretty interesting if he can build up those innings and just add a fourth pitch, and like you said, just continue to be a starting pitcher.
Yep. Yeah, I completely agree with you. We are going to have so much more content. I know you've got to get traveling today. I've got to go
Yep.
watch this Padres-Dodgers game. I'm super fired up to check out this. The MLB playoffs have been great for people that are
Yeah.
listening. Obviously we enjoy talking White Sox, but like just go enjoy some baseball, man. Like
Oh
this
yeah.
postseason has
Yeah.
been like elite compared to some previous years. There's a lot of storylines. There's a lot of good games. So I'm going to go watch some of that. I'll be back with Jeff Cohen next week. We're going to dive into some other stuff from Charlotte, from Winston, some teams that we didn't quite wrap on at the end of the season because things got busy. Dylan, thank you for joining me, my man. This is always a blast. We will link back up in a few weeks here and do something else and start to talk about maybe some free agents, maybe some fun random stuff, some training, some spring training storylines. We'll just kind of dive into it over the next few months here. But appreciate you joining, my man, and we'll see you next time on the Roundup.
Of course.